Greetings, everyone. This is the Cosmic Consciousness Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Sage. Today, we have the privilege of chatting with a friend of mine who's going to use a pseudonym for this particular podcast, but has several topics that I think will be of interest to people who subscribe to this particular channel podcast. So this is Frater IAC, but I'm going to let Frater IAC introduce himself.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you for having me on the podcast here. My name, for the purposes of this, is Frater IAC. The reason I say that is IAC stands for Imperat Animus Corpore. Spirit controls body, right? So why I do that is because it's so important to understand that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. We're not our bodies. And I want to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. I'm a Hermetic initiate. And what that means is I have studied the path of Hermeticism uh, for probably the better part of 20 years, but I've had a calling to do it long before that. And what Hermeticism is essentially, I guess we could call it a Western form of yoga that uses various disciplines to help people take much better control of their thinking and their feeling and so on. And ultimately, the path leads to unity with the Godhead, connection with God, otherwise known as theosis, nirvana, deification, whatever it is you want to call it. What you're shooting for on the Hermetic initiatory path is, in fact, connecting with God, however you envision the creator, whether you call it the Ein Sof or the source or God or Yahweh or whatever. Doesn't matter, because it's the same creative force. I've been a working magus for quite some time. I've got a YouTube channel and a Substack, and I'm very interested in making sure that we get the word out about how important it is to be careful about how you talk to you, and some other things about uplifting human consciousness.
You're trying to get your screen share up?
Oh, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
Let me show you. I have a screen that I want to start off sharing with you. Can you see it now, Dan?
Yeah, it's in a very small... There, that's better. That's expanded. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. So I developed this based on Stalking the Wild Pendulum, a diagram in chapter 5 of Stalking the Wild Pendulum by Itzak Bentov. And Bentov was very interesting. His book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, was written in 1977, but it's still very timely and still very apropos to spiritual ascent. And what he talks about, he gives a diagram about how consciousness expands as you ascend spiritually. And so if we look at this, I don't know if you can see my cursor here. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay. Well, essentially, this is the human range of consciousness generally. Okay. And so it starts down here in survival mode and goes clear up here. And essentially, this is our technology, our ability to amplify our own visual and auditory spectrum only really takes us to about here. And Bentov has two axes on this, because everyone knows you can explain the sum total of human knowledge through a graph like this, right? So let's take a stab at explaining the evolution of human consciousness through this particular one. We can see down below you have the continuum between materialism and spirituality. And look where it's I have the demarcation here, where we're starting to engage in what I call active introspection. And then we start learning other things at higher levels of initiation. And how Bentov approaches this is these Fs on these F5, F1, F2, F3, F8 on this axis are functions. They are the levels of consciousness. And essentially, as you grow your level of consciousness up here into the realms of love, joy, peace, and enlightenment, you have more and more and more options in terms of what you can do to react to various stimuli, both external and internal. So this is a good diagram. Bentov's, I just modified it to my own initiatory path, right? And so that's what this is. So essentially, what we're saying here is that as you come up here, if you're in survival mode, you have very, very few options about how you can respond to stimuli. If you get a little further where you're, maybe angry or whatever, you have more responses. And then here, of course, is your normal human level of response, assuming mental health. But then you go on. And I have the word soul mirror here. One of the things in the Bardon initiatory path that I really, really like about this path of spiritual development is this. Many of the paths, and including the great religions, for instance, the Judeo-Christian literature says, "Be ye therefore it says, "Be ye transformed," and it also says, "Be ye therefore perfect, as the Father in heaven is perfect." And then Christ uttered the words that were kind of misinterpreted, "For I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man can come to God but by me." That doesn't mean you have to cleave to a certain dogma. What that means is you have to go through the path that Christ illustrated when he was the Son of Man walking on this earth. He asked us to follow him, not to worship him. And so by following him, you're going to end up going through a whole process of spiritual growth wherein you end up killing or crucifying your fears and ego attachments. Because if you're attached to this materialism, the problem is, how can you get beyond that? How can you go beyond the materialistic attachments if you're scared of suffering, if you're scared you're going to die, if you're scared of deprivation, if you're still attached, let's say, my third grade teacher was kind of mean. And one day in third grade math, I had forgotten my pencil, Dan. And I went in the classroom and I was using a crayon. And the teacher got really mad and she actually threw a pencil at me across the room. And of course, this was back in the 1960s. So, that's how teachers were back then. But the point is, I was always scared of her and I held that grudge for many years. Why? I'm in my 60s now. You have to release that kind of stuff. If somebody burned you, if somebody did something to you, you have to release that. You got to release your anger and your pride and your lust and your gluttony and your fears, because all those ego attachments hold you back from the spiritual ascent that is our birthright. Did that even make sense, Dan?
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that comes up every once in a while, not very often, but most people talk about this developmental process, having to work through all of those kinds of obstacles that you're talking about, whether it's third grade teacher or other picadillos that you have in your life. And then more recently, I've been reading some things out of the life and teachings of the masters of the Far East, Baird Spalding. And a lot of people are probably familiar with that 5-volume set. And what is being discussed in volume 4 is um, that if we have a strong enough volition or willpower, that this can be something that happens rather quickly. And that really kind of made me question a little bit, because almost everything that we're exposed to talks about, the difficulty and how we have to work at this sometimes for years in order to reach those higher stages of spiritual development that you've got here on the chart. So, any reactions, responses to that?
Yeah, I absolutely have a response to that. Because essentially the question is, well, how fast can you get through this? And, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It takes work, and it takes a sustained effort over a period of time to get through this. That said, if you have a clear methodology and some clear techniques that can be used, you can get to the point where you can begin working with the elemental energies that have ruled you heretofore, and you, through these methods of active introspection, end up taking control over them, and then you can begin to use them and externalize them in your own work. So, and Dan, if you want me to, I can start talking a little bit about some of the actual techniques of spiritual transformation that
Sure.
Franz Bardon, and I am referring to Franz Bardon, Bardon, he wrote a volume he published it in 1955, and it was called Initiation into Hermetics. And it is, gosh, when I first read the book, maybe 10, 12 years ago, I knew it was the path I wanted to be on, because it talks about how you're going to purify your soul, which is your emotional makeup, and your mind, which are your thoughts. And you're going to so purify that you can take control of these elemental energies within yourself, begin to wield them externally. But the whole thing is about ultimately connecting with the Godhead. So, some of the techniques that he introduces right from the get-go. Are you ready for me to talk
Yeah.
about them, or do you
Yeah,
have any
sure.
follow-up? Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Does that require that you change screens, or are
I
we okay?
can.
Yeah. I
Sure.
mean, if that's going to be more helpful, I think, for people who are tuning
Yeah.
in,
Well, let me just
then
quit sharing the
we'll
screen for
take a
now.
minute to get that pulled up, and then you can talk. Yeah, because I think it's helpful for people to understand what some of the specifics are. I mean, for goodness sakes, the Buddhists refer quite often to all of the different paths and strategies that Buddha experimented with before he actually awoke and became the Buddha, became the awakened one. So yeah, no, I mean specific strategies. I don't know if you have a screen for that,
I
for
do.
what you're going to talk about. Okay, yeah, that looks like right. So there we go. Sure.
Yeah, and this is a map of human consciousness. And one of the first things that I want to say about this, anybody can look at a diagram, okay? These are maps. You've got to remember that the map is not the territory, okay? If you're just drawing maps and diagrams like this, that's fine. You're a map maker. But if you want to really undergo the initiatory process, you actually have to walk the path. Now, let's talk a little bit about um, this in terms of what David Hawkins wrote. Now, he published his book, his first book, Power versus Force, back in 1999, I believe, or 1994, something like that, in the 1990s. And Power versus Force was basically the idea that human consciousness exists on a logarithmic scale that leads from shame, which is the very lowest level of human consciousness, very close to death of the physical body. Okay. And then you go up, and there's shame, and there's guilt, and there's apathy, and then grief, and then fear. And fear drives the show for so many people in our world. It's just crazy how prevalent fear is, and fear mongering. So then you get to desire, but here, this anger, the level of 150 on his log scale, this anger is the first place where you start taking control and you start reacting to things instead of just allowing things to happen to you. And so you experience anger, that goes into pride, as in self-respect, right? Then you have the courage to start looking at reality. Remember the allegory of Plato's cave? And by the way, in my YouTube channel, I treat this stuff pretty extensively. So, feel free, listeners, feel free to go ahead and visit that YouTube channel, because my stuff is, based on the early steps of Bardon's initiation into Hermetics to help seekers understand that you got to take the bull by the horns. There's no shortcut around cleaning up your own house. You're extremely powerful. And I want to talk about that, how careful you have to be when talking to you. But let me finish this first. Um, Bardon introduces some things, and here, let me get rid of this, and let me just type in some things that we can do here. He has, okay, these are what I call the big five, these techniques here. These will help you ascend up to these more exalted levels of human consciousness over time. Now, the magic of washing is pretty easy. I mean, most of us take a bath every day or a shower, and we wash our hands numerous times a day. If you are in the shower, next time you're in the shower, think about traits that you might want to change, that you might want to get rid of. For instance, let's say you get angry too easily and you find yourself flying off the handle, at various people. You might want to wash away that tendency to be angry. And as you soap up your body and shampoo and everything, when you rinse off that tendency of anger, and it goes down the drain with the rest of the dirt. You wash off your body, right? The magic of washing. And there is a permutation that you can use that is often used by Hermetic initiates, and that is doing a cleansing bath, where you can use, like, the classic is just plain salt, and you mix plain salt in with water, lukewarm water, and you take it in the shower with you, and you just, at the end, when you're done with your shower, You just say, I'm going to pour this pitcher of salt water over my body, and it's going to wash away whatever it is that I'm going to try and wash away. And you pour it off over yourself and then rinse off, because salt will make your body sticky. So rinse. But that's how it works. And eating and drinking is what the Christians call the Eucharist. Okay. So every time you drink, you can say, I charge this cup of water or this food with the opposite virtue. Like if you're trying to get rid of anger, and you are irascible and you get mad at some poor hapless person at the drop of a pin, that's gonna probably be something like impatience. And so you're gonna charge your drink and your food with patience or kindness or whatever it is that is the opposite virtue to you that goes with the vice you're trying to get rid of. Did that make sense?
Yes. In fact, when you brought up the Eucharist, it made me think of a couple of things. There was this huge historical um, battle, really, between Catholics, Protestants. Consubstantiation or transubstantiation is Christ's body literally, physically in the elements of the Eucharist, while Protestants were saying, no, it's just a symbol and it's so when you're talking about washing and all that stuff, it seems to me that there is always going to be this kind of tension, maybe with even in this particular path to higher consciousness, of whether or not spirituality can be obtained or realized, recognized in sacred matter, to use Teilhard de Chardin's term, in sacred matter, like, the Catholic Eucharist, or whether we are transversing through the material, taking a shower, drinking water, whatever, consciousness we want to bring to those kinds of activities, if it's symbolic or is it something inside the physical nature of things that helps us find the path. And maybe that those are also combined, just the way, the Catholic Eucharist is. Does that question make sense?
It sure does.
Yeah.
And I definitely have an answer for you.
Okay.
The answer may make some people feel a bit uncomfortable, because the question that came immediately to my mind is, why does that even matter? People died over that, Dan. They fought wars over this. They tortured people over this. And it doesn't, in the end, our own certainty is the enemy of truth, isn't it? How many times have you been on Facebook or social media or whatever, and somebody makes a post that says, oh, here, look at this beautiful picture of the earth from space. Oh, it's gorgeous. Look how it spins, and the beautiful blue-green sphere. And guaranteed there's going to be somebody that comes on there who's absolutely certain, who says, oh, this is fake, it's AI. Well, okay. and then you're going to have somebody else who's equally certain come on and say, well, the earth's flat. I mean, the reality is, we know so little about anything, it's not even funny. And when you look at the known universe, Dan, it's like less than 10% of the universe is even perceivable by us using our modern technology. It's crazy. And you've heard about dark matter and dark particles, in the quantum field and gravity waves. The universe has been proven by quantum mechanics to be multi-dimensional. and much of it is not visible, is not perceivable by us in these clay vessels that we call bodies. So, first of all, certainty can be the enemy of truth. Our best bet, our first step to wisdom, is understanding how little we really know. So I'm not going to be certain with you. I'm not going to be, I'm going to be certain saying that these techniques do work. And when I do it, and I'll speak for myself. When I'm charging my water and my food, I believe that the virtue is inculcated, or that the food or water
Okay.
is saturated with that virtue, and that when I eat of it, I am actually eating or drinking in that virtue. And so the water or the food are going to be nourishing my physical body, but the energy of my intent is going to be nurturing my astral body and my mental body. Does that make sense?
Yep. Sure.
Okay, okay. And so when we're looking at washing, eating, and drinking, now let's get into this one. Breathing. This is now I discovered fairly recently. Um, I read a fantastic book that is by it's written as anonymous, but it's called Meditations on the Tarot, a journey into Christian Hermeticism. And the guy that wrote it was his name was actually Valentin Tomberg. Um, he wrote it in the mid 20th century. He was a Eastern European guy, and he was a devout Catholic, and he was also a follower of Rudolf Steiner and Helen Blavatsky and the Theosophy movement, right? And he wrote this book called Meditations on the Tarot, which is just outstanding. And each of the major arcana of the tarot is part of a book of wisdom, much like other wisdom literature in the various religions. It takes you, it's called the Fool's Journey in the tarot, and it takes you through all of the challenges, all the spiritual challenges that you're going to face in your ascent. Well, in the section, the chapter on the Hierophant, which is actually, it's the Pope, right? And he's got a triple arm cross in the left hand, and then his right hand, he's got two fingers up in the traditional Christian blessing, and there's a couple of tonsured monks in front of him, kind of looking on and receiving the blessing. Tomberg says that when you are praying, prayer rises to the divine level, and with the in breath, the answer, the manifestation of that prayer comes back, right? And there is a group of Orthodox Christians called the Hesychasts. And the Hesychasts were Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, and they were in the monasteries in the desert in Egypt, and then as Orthodox Christianity, became more ensconced, they were in the monasteries in the mountains of Greece. And the hesychastic breathing technique calls for you. The way it works is it uses a simple one-line prayer as an anchor. And so the prayer is, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. So how you do it with the hesychastic breathing and the posture, because you're in an asana posture when you do it. And essentially, you've got your feet flat on the ground, your hands palms down on your knees, your back is straight, your head is slightly bowed in reverence for divine providence, right? And you utter the prayer, have mercy on me, a sinner, and then you inhale, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, right? So you're inhaling the divine energy to manifest what the prayer was that you uttered. And I generally use that method in working with these vices that I want to get rid of and the virtues that I want to bring in. Does that make sense? And so,
Mhm.
like, I'm going to breathe out. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, it seems like this whole breath work is, fairly common across multiple, um, religious traditions, particularly when it comes to, strategies or meditation that lead you to the divine.
Absolutely. And I'm Christian, but in a very esoteric sense. I don't think God cares very much about dogma. I think God cares about love and joy and peace and light and uplifting your consciousness to where you are vibrating at those levels so that you can actually connect and do good in this world. That's the issue. That's what we're trying to achieve, right? And so, with the breathing, and certainly in yoga, in Tai Chi meditations, in Buddhist meditation, and now in the Christian discipline, they have that that breathing discipline, and I have found that to be extremely effective. And there's also an element that Bardon introduces called pore breathing, which is a common breath method in things like yoga and martial arts, where you're breathing in through your feet. I mean, and that's the idea behind it, is that you imagine you're using your plastic imagination to imagine that while you're breathing the air in through your lungs, you're also breathing in that virtue through all the pores in your body. And then you're breathing out the vice as a sort of black ink coming out of your pores on the out breath. And so pore breathing takes it to a new level, and it makes it rather powerful. And it is very common across disciplines, yoga, the Tai Chi, various martial arts uh, often use the concept of pore breathing. And then your fourth one, we know that today, Dan, is affirmations. And the best time to do these affirmations, like if you want to get rid of pride, um, you're going to say in the present tense, you're going to develop an affirmation that I am humble at all times and in all situations, right? And so when you're in the hypnopompic state, which is just as you're waking up, and when you're in the hypnagogic state, which is just as you're going to sleep, you want to repeat the auto suggestion 40 times. Because what you're doing, and I know because I've had experience as a vocational counselor for a number of years. In the earlier parts of my career, I was doing that. And I'll tell you what, there were people that I worked with who had told themselves for years that they were a loser, they were a loser, they were a loser, and they genuinely believed that. So when we were working with them and it looked like their lives were turning around and they were about to become winners, their subconscious mind corrected that for them. The subconscious mind is uncritical. It believes what you tell it, right? And so if you've told yourself that you're a loser or you're no good or whatever it is, if you start winning, it's going to take care of that for you. It's going to say, wait a minute, you're a loser. Yeah, let me fix it for you. And you're going to be presented with situations and you're going to engage in self sabotage so you can go back to being a loser and your subconscious will have fixed it for you. Do you see what I mean? And I know that I went awfully fast in that explanation, but I have seen that work time and time again. That psychological dynamic work time and again. And so you have to be really careful about how you talk to you. And I want to elaborate on that later on, because the concept is waves of thought energy. The universe is not necessarily made up of solid particles. It's made up of waves. And a lot of times the particulate matter, even that we can see, like the desk that is in front of me, it's actually, if you go to the subatomic level, it's just empty space interspersed with atoms that are there in a certain configuration that makes it a desk, right? And so the desk is the same substance as your thoughts. So you have to be very careful. And when you're loading a thought itself is relatively harmless until you attach a feeling to it. And then it becomes a feeling thought form and it becomes very powerful. And so every time you think or feel something negative, you're putting waves out into that great roiling ocean that is the human unconscious, the human consciousness, maybe we should call it. And you're familiar with the old Greek pantheon, Clothos, Atropos, you have the three Moirai that, they weave the threads of destiny. I imagine that as an ocean of human consciousness. And everybody puts out their own thoughts and their own feelings and their own words and their own actions based on whatever it is that drives their show: fear, greed, avarice, hatred, pride, whatever it is, or love, joy, peace, and light. And, the idea is if you can elevate your consciousness to those higher levels of love, joy, peace, and enlightenment, and you can hold that frequency, you are creating interference patterns in this great sea of human consciousness. So you're stabilizing it, but you have to do that with yourself first over an extended period of time in a concerted effort. And you do that using these big five. And auto suggestion is a major part of that, because what you're doing is you're reprogramming your subconscious mind to this new thing, this virtue, rather than the vice that it was convinced was the right way for it to go. Did that,
So
do you
what
have any
would a
follow up?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, what would a breathing strategy or auto-suggestion strategy look like for someone who's trying to practice this on a day-to-day basis? So, for instance, they wake up in the morning, they need to, they're engaged in this kind of discipline, or something that maybe happens morning, noon, and night, the different kind of strategies. I would guess that it has to be something that they're committed to doing pretty regularly and not just randomly. Okay, I'm going to do it, today, and then I'll see how I'm feeling tomorrow. But it has to be a commitment to a discipline. So,
Right.
what is that going to look like for someone who is on this path?
Excellent question. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how it looks on the ground, because that's exactly what we need to talk about here. The first thing, the thing that you start with is your will, your volition. Okay. And volition is made up of two parts. Okay. Imagine yourself sitting in a chair and you decide, I'm going to get up out of this chair and I'm going to go open that door. But then you don't get up. So you've willed yourself to get out of the chair and go open the door, but you didn't get out and open it. So volition equals will, the intent to do, plus the action that you take to make that happen. So the act of volition is the simple decision to make that I'm going to do this. I'm going to get this done. I'm going to engage in active introspection that purifies my soul and my mind. Now, the question that we're missing here is, how do you make the list of the things you want to change about yourself, right? And so what that is Bardon has you make two what he calls soul mirrors, which are essentially lists. You have a list of things about yourself that you don't like about yourself that don't serve you. Like I'm proud, I'm arrogant, I get angry all the time, I drive like a maniac, whatever it is, and you make a big long list, and usually people that are serious about this are going to have well over 100 things on their list. They really are. And then at the same time, you're going to make what he called a white soul mirror, or a list of all your virtues. But the important thing about that is you're going to list what's good about you, but you're also going to list the virtues that are aspirational, the virtues that you want to replace some of those vices with, where you have a weakness in that area. So, like for pride, you're going to replace that with humility. For arrogance, or better yet, lust, like if you're addicted to porn, you might want to replace that with the virtue of respect for the other person, and self-respect for yourself. So you're going to have these lists of things that you want to change. Then you decide to start. So the day you start, you're going to say, I will start this. And then you're going to act to start this. That's magic. And the magic about that is when you make a decision and put one foot on the start of that path, the universe moves with you. How many times have you seen that happen, within yourself and with other people? You can sit and wallow in misery for a long time, but when you finally decide, hey, I'm going to get my act together, you get up out of the chair and you put one foot in front of the other. All of a sudden, the universe does move in your favor, but you got to do the work. So now you decide, I'm going to do this. Then when you get up in the morning, you decide, what am I going to work on now? There's got to be a virtue that you're working on now and a vice that you're working on getting rid of now. And you're going to work them one at a time, right? Sustained effort over an extended period of time. That's what this is. And so you're going to get up in the morning, and just as you're coming awake, you're going to remember that, and you're going to say that auto suggestion 40 times. And then you're going to get up and go about your business. So you're going to take a shower, and you're going to wash away whatever vice you're trying to get rid of, right? Then you're going to get out of the shower and you're going to have your morning coffee. I like coffee. Some people don't drink coffee. I'm fine with whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. But anytime you eat or drink, every time you eat or drink, you're going to charge that food and that water or whatever it is you're drinking with the virtue that you want to inculcate, that you want to internalize, that you want to make a part of your being, right? And then you're going to meditate using breathing. And usually the magic number for me is 40 repetitions. And so when I'm breathing in a virtue and breathing out a vice, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that twice during the day, because it takes about 10 minutes. Big deal. So you do it, and you breathe in what you want, and you breathe out what you want to get rid of, right? And then the next time you eat, you do the same thing with your charging the food, charging the drink, right? And then when you go to bed, just as you're drifting off, you say your auto suggestion 40 times. And you do that, like, let's say you're addicted to cigarettes. Because I was addicted to cigarettes, okay? And I smoked my last cigarette in 2010, all right? So what I had to do is decide, I really want to do this. I'm going to quit smoking. And then I would do, the auto suggestion in the morning. Then I would do the eating and drinking. Then I would do the washing. Then I would do the breathing. Then the auto suggestion. And if you do that, you're going to get rid of that addiction pretty darn quick. And for cigarettes, it takes about a month not to have it eat at you, that you're dying for one. And then after that, you're free. See, because what this is about, Dan, is joy. That's freedom. You're freeing yourself from all of these vices that hold you down and chain you to this earth. Like, think of the allegory of Plato's cave. All those people are in that cave, trapped in that cave in chains of their own making. And the guy escapes, he sees reality, he comes back in and they kill him because they don't believe him. He's trying to tell them the truth and they don't believe him because they're still chained to this wall in this cave in chains of their own making. And that's their fears and attachments. Did that make sense?
Yeah,
And do you
in
have any
fact,
follow up?
we've talked about this before, and you mentioned it a couple of times, but why would that process, that autosuggestion 40 times, focusing on either vices or virtues, why is that termed magic?
Well, because we can't explain why it works through modern science. That's the definition of magic. Magic is the power of human intent as it manifests in ways that are not currently explainable by science. That's what it is. And so magic only exists because we don't know how it works yet. And I do want to make a minor correction. When you're using autosuggestion, you're not doing a negative. You're only working with the virtue that you want to make part of your being,
Okay.
because
Okay.
it's got to be in the present tense and it's got to be positive. You're breathing out the vice and you're washing away the vice. But the rest of it is, you're working to bring in that virtue and replace the vice in your being, in your mind and your soul with that virtue.
Yeah, so this reminds me, in fact, the language of virtue goes back to Aristotle, and I'm sure it goes back even farther than that. But his virtue ethics, um, in his virtue ethics, it discussed more his moral philosophy of virtue ethics, discussed habituation. And that sounds a lot like an auto-suggestion. And he wouldn't have used the word magic, I don't think, but something that we do in repetition over a long period of time eventually isn't something we just do. It becomes internalized and becomes a part of our character. And so
Yes.
virtue is, for Aristotle, virtue is that um, state of character lying in the mean, and he called it a golden mean, that would be uh, basically a part of our being rather than just something that we do.
Oh, that's excellent. Have you ever, well, I know you have, but for the listeners on this podcast, think about the caduceus, the
Yeah.
the bar,
The copulating vipers that are the symbol for the medical industry.
the copulating vipers. I love it. That's wonderful. What a fun way of describing that. But actually, in the hermetic point of view, those two vipers, there's a black one and there's a white one, right? And the black one is the involutionary spiral that goes from the divine down to the dense material realm. The white viper is the evolutionary spiral that takes one up from the dense material realm, constrained as we are by time and space, up to the more divine, the more subtle realms that vibrate at higher levels. That's what you're doing here. So you're trying to see, because when you came here to Earth, you were born with the set of talents that you have right now. Okay. You were given those talents on loan. I mean, you and I both are, we got a couple of brain cells to rub together, right? But the reality is, I could just as easily have been born with Down syndrome, and that would make me no less precious in the eyes of God than I am now. And so the talents you have are on loan. And that's why Christ gave us the parable of the talents. You got to use your talents and try and make them grow. And we're born at a time, in a place, among people, and presented with situations that allow us to ascend spiritually in the ways that we wanted to ascend spiritually when we chose our family and chose this incarnation, or not, because it's
So,
always voluntary.
so the strategies, the process, the engagement of this protocol in this tradition is termed magic.
Yes. Which is, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, if you read Franz Bardon, I mean, he calls it magic, and he calls the practitioner a magician. But I mean, I like the term metaphysics a little bit better, because metaphysics are physics that we cannot yet explain through current science, but they exist because they can be observed, at least. you know I mean, scientists now, the physicists, um, have been learning a bunch of things about our universe that they can't yet prove, right? Like bends in time, and things like that. You can prove it mathematically, but in terms of doing it in a laboratory setting, even the huge multi-million dollar particle colliders don't have, they can't you can't prove a lot of this stuff, so it's metaphysics. um and philosophy, and back in the days of Aristotle, you brought up Aristotle. Magic makes us uncomfortable in 2025, doesn't it? I feel uncomfortable with the word magic, but people didn't always feel uncomfortable with that, because in Aristotle's day, and certainly Pythagoras, and a number of the other Greek philosophers and the Neoplatonists were definitely magi, in the sense that we think of magicians, or maguses, right? They knew how to do things with their mind that could manifest as thoughts and feelings in other people, and they could make it manifest, if they were powerful enough, in this material realm. Why and how? And they didn't know, and so they called it metaphysics. And the Hermeticism is named after the Egyptian god Thoth, or Hermes, the Greek messenger god, or the Mercury, the Roman messenger god. That's who that is. And the idea behind it is that Hermes Trismegistus was called thrice great. Why was he called thrice great? Because you have a physical body, you have a soul, which is your emotional makeup and your character, and you have a mental body, which is your thoughts. And Hermes Trismegistus so mastered himself that he was a pure and humble vessel, without fear or attachment, that could then be filled with and shine forth divine light to make the world a better place because he lived. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So this is uh, maybe a softball question, um, that this whole path, process, strategies are um, available to us in order to become to obtain higher consciousness, or God consciousness, or Christ consciousness, Buddha consciousness, cosmic consciousness. Why? Why do we want to have higher consciousness?
Because it's our birthright. I believe, and this is just speaking for me, okay? I'm just going to tell you what I believe. I believe that God is essentially the quantum field. It is a passive awareness, and it exists. There's no place where it doesn't exist. And in fact, in the Lord's Prayer, when Jesus uttered the Lord's Prayer, he spoke Aramaic, okay? And that starts Abu Dibashmayo, which is Daddy who is everywhere. That's how he said it, you know? And so the reality, we interpret it where, you know, Christ is like external and some God, but the reality is you're trying to bring that force within yourself because that's your birthright as a human being. We're created in the image and likeness of God, of divine providence, right? And the image is a no-brainer. I mean, we can always choose 24/7. It's an irrevocable gift. We can always choose to turn away from the divine providence and follow our own lights or not. And the other part of that is the likeness of God. And the likeness of God is something you have to work at because that is the evolutionary path. Because when God created a womb within itself and put the universe in that womb. We are part of that universe. All of us live and breathe and have our being as ideas within the divine mind. I mean, that's just how it is. And so the reality, when you're looking at us as at the very at the highest level, we exist as what Stylianos Ateshlis and others have called monads. And I don't know if you've heard the term monad. Have you heard it?
Spinoza, the
Right.
great philosopher Spinoza. Yeah.
Okay. So your monad is the immortal flame that is your spirit. That is part of God. That was part of God when it when God exploded itself so that it could then experience all things through our ascent back to the source. That's what this is. It's a involutionary path of creation, and it's an evolutionary path back to God, right? So that's how I see it, at least. And
So
so,
there is in this last 50 years or more, probably maybe it's replete in human history, where people use these kinds of concentrated processes, protocols, disciplines to enrich themselves, that they become closer to their conception of the divine. In fact, we see it with televangelists or people that just simply, gosh, the robber barons of yesteryear and today write books. I mean, remember how many years ago was it the book The Secret came out?
oh God,
Where
yeah, I remember that.
yeah, where
Oh,
if you it's not quite wish fulfillment, but if you concentrate on certain goals, objectives in your life, those things can be achieved and obtained. So there is this confluence many times, people who um, utilize spiritual language and disciplines to say, oh, we can all be millionaires. We can all have success. We can all. How is this different?
oh gosh, let's talk about how this is different because it is different. Okay. You know, I said earlier that, you know, you got to do a soul mirror. These things do not serve you. Okay. These things do not serve us at all. All right. These are akin to the seven deadly sins. And so, sure, totally, you can, as a man thinketh, so he is. And you can definitely use these skills for nefarious reasons. Problem is, um, divine providence tends to swat people like that down. You know, look at the Tower of Babel myth in I think it's in Genesis. And then you got the Tower of Babel, and the people built this tower thinking, oh, we can lift ourselves up as gods without God. And so they tried to build this giant tower, and God knocked its top off and cast it down. And that's an allegory. I mean, that's kind of what happens when you put yourself up. Because look at it this way, Dan. We're born, we live, and then we die. We don't take the physical vessel that carries around our soul and our mind and our immortal spirit. This physical vessel, this body that you have, it's going to die. Mine's going to die. We're all going to die, the bodies that we have. But our consciousness is going to go on. And so my question for people that want to get rich, rich, rich and, become a billionaire, first of all, what's the motivation there? When we look at these billionaires, and I'm going to try and be nice because they're misguided. These are people who are so afraid, so fearful that they won't have enough, that they will somehow be deprived of something, and they're so afraid of that they have chosen to amass wealth at the expense of everyone else. For what? Because when they die, they're not going to take any of that with them. And there is really no security on this earth either. I mean, I don't know if you remember the old movie Arthur with Dudley Moore. The butler that he loved, got cancer, and he was going to die. And Dudley, the playboy billionaire, goes out and buys him all kinds of toys, like a basketball and stuff. And he brings all of it home, like that's going to help him when he's dying of cancer. I mean, the reality is we come and we go. Consider the Sermon on the Mount, where it says, consider the lilies of the field. They toil not, nor do they spin. And yet I tell you this, Solomon, in all his glory, was not clothed as one of these. If God so clothes the grass of the field, will he not clothe you even more? So why even worry about it? And that I butchered the last part of that quote.
Yeah, no, but
It
that's
was definitely
the sentiment among, I would guess, the sentiment among people who are these like televangelists is, oh, this is what God wants for you. God wants you to be a millionaire and to have as many joys and toys in this life as possible. And so,
right.
therefore, use these disciplines in order to make your life easier, more luxurious, and celebrate all of these great gifts that come your way. And so, I've got kind of an answer for this, but what is the difference between obtaining all of that higher and subscribing to the notion that you're in that process of achieving all of these toys, obtaining all of these goodies, you're also manifesting and achieving a higher consciousness. And that those people, in fact, this goes back to kind of the Calvinist Protestant work ethic that
Uh,
if you look around, well, surely the people that are suffering and that are impoverished and are starving to death can't be the elect. It must be those people who are successful that are God's elect. And so, therefore, we want to be like them. So, do you understand what my question is there?
I do. I do. And we can't stop people from doing that, Dan, nor should we even try. If a televangelist wants to say, oh, you need to vote this way, you need to think this way, I'm going to preach the prosperity gospel to you, that's fine. That, people are going to fall for that until they realize maybe it doesn't work the way they want. Because the reality is, you're going to feel empty because toys don't really do anything for you, because you don't take them with you. This is a finite experience. And so there are laws, and we call them in Hermeticism, they're planetary energies. And we call the planetary energy of taking care of business here on this earth the laws of Saturn. And there are newbies that come into this Hermeticism that feel like, oh, they're going to magic their way into a big fat bank account. They're going to magic their way into more power. They're going to magic their way into a nice car or more sex. But you know what? In the end, you don't need magic to take care of your basic survival needs. You have opposable thumbs. You have a brain. You got a pair of legs. You got some arms. You've got a mouth and a nose. You can earn your living and survive if you can. And there are people who can't take care of themselves, and we have to take care of them. But
Well,
if
and
for
as
most
a matter
people,
of fact, that's kind of where I was headed with some of this
yeah,
question, is that it seems to me that the great spiritual masters and even, Jesus used this a lot too, that the reason we want to follow this kind of a path, whether it's the Hermetic path, magic, whatever, you know, Kriya yoga, um, Buddhist meditation, any of those things, a Christian um, um, institutional guidelines for life, is to become a better person based on the golden rule, that it
yep,
has to be something that is gauged to be mutually beneficial. If you are on this path and are simply looking to gain for yourself without that larger consciousness that you and I are the same thing, that we are a part of this wholeness reality, then it's going to be counterproductive and probably one of the vices rather than a virtue. And so for me to get
absolutely.
mine at your expense is not the path. The
No.
path is the golden rule. And any tradition or discipline that is not abiding by the golden rule, I think, is kind of a fake religion or a con job.
Well, then, let me ask you a question. How do you feel like our whole profoundly materialistic consumer society then is an illusion?
Yeah,
Because he who dies with the most toys wins is not the truth. That's not the truth.
yeah, and this subscribes to that Hindu concept of Maya, that this world, this material world, is basically illusionary, that we are in fact one, and that we need to be about the business of living that oneness rather than these kind of diluted concepts of individual selves, that our individual path to wholeness uses these kinds of maps of consciousness or these kind of protocols or strategies in order for us to realize the ultimate truth, that we are all one together.
Well, what you're talking about here is the moral compass. Because as we cleave to the primacy of shareholder profits and other profoundly materialistic dictums by which we operate in our society. I mean, yeah, we're like the Ferengi on Star Trek, in a lot of ways. We're like, oh, that's found in volume 51, paragraph 896 on page whatever. Oh, you're screwed. Well, the golden rule is the moral compass. And I think of the moral compass as having 4 points, right? And these are associated with the four Platonic elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Love is water. Joy is air because it's light and it uplifts. Peace is earth. And as you, what you find, what I have found, and what other people in the Hermetic disciplines that I interact with have found, is that as you use these methods and others, more advanced ones, to purify yourself and render yourself into a pure and humble vessel, free of fear and attachment, you're then filled with these energies, and they become the moral compass or the golden rule by which you live. So love is equated to water, joy, peace is earth. Earth is the well of silence. Because as you purify and get rid of all of these vices, you know, you're going to be able to be filled with this inner peace. And the inner peace actually becomes a portal, Dan, through which you can receive insights and intuitions from divine providence or the angelic realms, if you will, that can help you move forward. And enlightenment, of course, is fire. That's in the south. That's its direction. And so, because of light, enlightenment, right? And so that's the light of divine providence that fills you and then shines forth from you. And we're in the process of undergoing some real uncomfortable changes as a species. And, that I know that many people are talking about the change of age. The Kali Yuga is ending. The age of the Piscean age is becoming the Aquarian age, and all of these great financial centers and huge empires are going to go by the wayside, and we're going to have to become less grandiose and more local in our ideas and our ideals, because we've been thinking that we could create a giant government that's going to take care of our every need: healthcare, old age pensions, roads, uh welfare assistance, food stamps, all of those things. um and we tried, but what happened is you had materialism rear its ugly head and introduce corruption into that system. And so gradually over many years, and you could trace this back to the 1971 essay called An Attack on American Free Enterprise that Lewis Powell, the Nixon Supreme Court appointee, penned for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, that laid out the pathway for essentially a corporate takeover of the republic. And through that massive amounts of propaganda, we lost our moral compass. We now hate people for what? That are different than we are. We hate immigrants. Why? We hate people that have different colored skin. Why? We hate. We mistrust. Why? Why do we do that? And there is a group of people who genuinely believe that the only legitimate role of the federal government, speaking of the United States, is defense. Everything else goes by the wayside, and that needs to devolve back to, and we're now in an involutionary pattern, only the government is actually devolving or creating an involutionary spiral where they're sending down these functions like welfare assistance, roads and bridges, um, old age pensions and all that. They're coming down to the states and local governments as lesser funded and eventually unfunded mandates. So it's coming unraveled. And what we're going to have to do, Dan, locally, is we're going to have to learn to live with each other. We're going to have to learn to respect each other. We're going to have to learn to organize ourselves so that we can feed each other, clothe each other, and live and make ends meet. and survive. Because the question that always comes to my mind as an idealist, because I am an idealist, I look at the way things are and I think, why aren't they the way they could be instead? You know, and what we need to do is learn to organize ourselves so that we're not these rugged individuals. The survival of the fittest thing, I mean, I understand why the billionaires are touting that, because they feel they're the fittest because they have more money than everybody else and they can afford to live in gated communities and bunkers. Like Mark Zuckerberg's got a nice bunker over there in Hawaii. But, the reality is, what about the rest of us? You know, launch off these billionaires to Mars because they're going to terraform Mars. Well, what about the rest of us? What about our water? What about our food? What about, how do we take care of each other? How do we educate our children? How do we take care of people that physically are incapable of taking care of themselves? You know, and we're going to have to rethink all of that at the local level and change the way we operate. You know, and that's going to have a lot of we're going to have a lot of growing pains, and there's going to be a lot of upheaval as this happens. Because I mean, a lot of the listeners of this podcast, because I'm going to put this podcast out on my Substack as well, and there are going to be people who think, well, you're full of you know what, because it is survival of the fittest. That's the way things are. Well, okay, but how do we determine who's fit and who's not fit? Is it might equals right? What about Stephen Hawking? Stephen Hawking made major contributions to science, and he was a mess because he had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And the problem is, if he'd have been an American with our healthcare system, we would have never heard from the guy, because he wouldn't have been able to afford all the things that the public health system in the United Kingdom gave to him, so that he could have the medical support that he needed to continue working, even though his body was degenerating and dying. Did that even make sense? I know
The
we're going around the
yeah,
bush here.
move to the theme that you're introducing about moving more locally resonates with E.F. Schumacher's classic book, Small is Beautiful. And then, of course, his follow-up book was Good Work. I'm sure he wrote other things, but his signature book was Small is Beautiful. And again, that echoes much of what the 17th, 18th century libertarian thinkers were fighting against, and that was concentrated power. And for them, it was the church and the state. And currently, most concentrated power is in corporations, multinational corporations, which have a tendency to be more powerful than governments themselves. In fact, most of them own governments, and governments create policies that are favorable to those highly concentrated, powerful corporations. So the small is beautiful. Getting local is a movement that, again, like you say, is going to have fits and starts and moving us in a direction that some people may not be all that comfortable with or familiar with.
Well, yeah, let's kind of talk about that a little bit. My question is always, we're here. We're born here. We live here in these physical bodies. We need clean air, we need clean water, we need food, shelter, clothing, heat, transportation, etc. Why have we not organized ourselves to take care of our survival needs, so that all of us can embrace the birthright of spiritual ascent that allows us to reach our highest potential and greatest power as human beings in this incarnation? Because that's what this is about. And where are our community gardens? Where is our vertical farming? Where are the hemp fields that allow us to have a textile industry that's localized? These are the kinds of things that people are starting to wake up to. the fact that, hey, you know, I can get some grow lights and create a hydroponic growing system and have my garden right in an extra bedroom in my house. You know, I can grow nutritious, excellent food that isn't covered with insecticides and herbicides, and it's going to be pure and organic because I grew it myself and I can do that. Why have we not done that? And it's because of fear. It's easy to fear not having enough. It's easy to fear suffering. The Buddha talked about suffering, that life is suffering. That's the given. That's the thing that we all do when we come here on this earth. We suffer. We have aches. We have pains. Sometimes we don't have what we want. Sometimes we may not even have what we need. Why do we not take care of one another so that all of us you see this in anthropology textbooks, um, you know when supposedly when like if we go into the way back when people knapped flint and they would just take a hammer stone and they'd chip until they had a sharp edge, and that was like the first tool you know that humans developed. But we have always grouped together because we don't have huge fangs, we're not covered with thick fur, we don't have giant claws, we can't run at cheetah speed. And so if we embraced survival of the fittest and we lived our lives that way, we would have gone extinct thousands of years ago. The reality is that we group together in tribes so that we can live together. We take care of the people in our tribe and everybody contributes. So, like in the ancient days, you'd have flint knappers, you'd have weavers, you'd have people that, made glue and spears and so on, people that made clothing, and they all worked together for the good of the group. And I'm not talking about some kind of utopia. I mean, I'm just talking about this is the way we lived. And the ideal was that as soon as people banded together and developed technologies that allowed them to have more leisure time, they could then use this leisure time to ascend spiritually, to learn about, being better, maximizing our potential, you know? But somehow we lost that as we moved forward because we went down these materialistic rabbit holes. We went down the rabbit holes of isms and capitalism, materialism, communism, Nazism. All of these isms are rabbit holes because they're illusions. Did that make sense?
Yeah, and in fact, in some ways, I'm very cognizant of the time. I usually like to keep these in about an hour, and
Oh,
I
sorry.
that feels like it is kind of coming full circle, that we are in a time and space now where all of us need to be um, doing the kind of work that you're suggesting here. Is that, obviously, collectively, we are in a grand transition, and that we individually needs to be working in together individually together, to make this a better place for everybody, and that tracking our own awareness and consciousness in a way that facilitates a move upward, is pretty much where we are. So I mean, it's where we need to be. And not all of us are, and there's an increasing number of people that are interested in that. And so that's obviously one of the reasons we need to have this kind of conversation openly, and have it more widespread and accessible to as many people as possible, so they can find their way in the midst of all of this transition and chaos, and sometimes some pain and suffering that we need to cope with and deal with. So that's one of the reasons I think you're doing a YouTube channel and a Substack. Those of us that are on a path of seeking higher consciousness, higher understanding, trying to become better people individually, we also want to make a better place for us collectively.
Indeed. Well, yeah, thank you for having me on, Dan.
Yeah, and
I
so
really
what I will do, um, I'm going to make sure that I get this pseudonym correct. Frater. I think, is it Frater? Frater.
frater. It
Frater.
means, yeah,
Frater IAC. And
brother.
yes, you can email me a couple of the links for your Substack and for your YouTube channel and any other things that you're doing in terms of research, all of that. And I'll make sure I'll post those in the description once this podcast is published. So, yeah, no, I thank you very much for sharing what I know will be a helpful set of strategies, insights. Anybody that's pursuing or curious, that is seeking ways in which they can make their lives better and the lives of other people around them better, find this as a good, helpful resource. So, thanks. I appreciate your participation. And this is the Cosmic Consciousness Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Sage. And until next time, peace, everyone. Appreciate your participation.